Hi, Lee. So nice to see you.
Good to see you.
I'm thrilled to be talking with you in regard to this sustainability project. You're someone I admire very much, and also someone who's taken a very strong stance on the responsibility that fashion and textile industries need to have, or accept, in relationship to this crisis that we're living in. And so thank you for that. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about, with Fashion Week coming up, what the New York Textile Month's position is in this transition from an old way of working to a more earth-friendly, approach.
The New York Textile Month doesn't have a policy, if you want, because it's an open platform where we host many events. I invented this to give my students at Parsons a sort to embed them in the city and to make the city more textile minded, if you want, because I felt that textile was in New York present, but you couldn't feel it. And not in the galleries, not in a museum, not in the public space, and so on. And so we managed quite quickly, which is uniquely New Yorkish, I think, to make that into a real event. And in any other city, it would have taken much more years. And so we certainly don't push everything or post everything. If there's something which is definitely not to standard or not, concerned with the new way of life, we wouldn't take notice. But there's not a formal selection program yet, if you want. However, we do see that it becomes more and more the issue, and that it's more and more on everybody's mind, and that it's more and more, there's more discussions. We have our little TV, like our textile TV, where we do discussions with people, where it comes up all the time. So it's the foundation, it's the underlaying strengths, I think, of what is new in textiles and fiber now. So definitely it's on the map. In our magazine, Talking Textiles, dedicated also to the New York Textile Month, there is a lot of articles about it and examples. And then in the World Hope Forum, which we organize from different countries each month, there is, it's one of the major topics.
Now, how do you feel about self-regulation and sort of legal regulations? So, for example, there are bills being proposed in America to sort of, mandate certain regulations, but then Copenhagen Fashion Week has set their own, standards, for example, and other, I think Oslo has signed on and a few other places. Do you think one approach is preferable to another?
For me, the only real possibility of quite major change would be a political one, which is legislation which puts a minimum price on things. We did that in Europe on agriculture, that you could not sell potatoes and tomatoes, under a certain price, so as not to kill everybody else. And I think that should happen in textiles. And in fashion, because there is promotions of things, and bikinis for $3, and then when you look at the stitching, you don't even know how one person can make this, where it's completely bewildering, how can such a thing have such a price tag? I think this is where we could win. And it would be very simple. You would set an honest price on a t-shirt, on underwear, on jeans, and so on. I'm not the one who's going to make the price because I don't have enough knowledge. But that would mean that we could not really produce the shit we produce now. And so that basically people then will turn to more bigger price points because they will have to compensate for the loss of the volume. And so they will use better materials, so that is recyclable. Because one of the problems today is that it's so much shit in the beginning that you cannot recycle shit. And so, and even at a second hand, it doesn't qualify because it doesn't wash, wear, and so on. So that's one of the major things. And then there is the overproduction, which is bewildering, I would say. Especially in view of the so-called artificial intelligence, which is figuring out how much there should be made and how the styles should look. So why is that making so many mistakes, like thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces produced too much, coming to our landfills? So there is another, maybe there could be a stop, a sort of, legislation on the amount of things which can be made by one single company. That is a little bit more drastic, I think. That's becoming a bit dictatorial. So you would hope that you could just manage this with social pressure. And talking about social pressure, I believe that the younger generation, which I call the great generation, after the grandchild of Martin Luther King, they will be the first generation to refuse. So refusal will be a very big weapon in this fight. And then we see that companies really desire, I think, to change, but the ships are so big that it's sometimes very difficult to turn them around in a real manner. And we forget a lot of other things we can do. You know, we forget that really great design is one of the best remedies, because we see that in the modernist interiors and furniture and design. I mean, it's all still there. It's all still produced since the 1930s. So that is 90 years of production of the same thing, which then you can, you know, adapt to your environment and renew and rekindle. So that's maybe one of the most important things we have forgotten, is how to properly design, also make patterning, you know, drape, know what is actually the weight of the textile, how it behaves. All the weights now are much too light. You know, that's why all these pretty summer dresses look horrible, because on the body now it becomes like a chiffon. And yeah, so there's very many things we can do, I think. There should be more public warnings also. I think there should be more photography of the landfills. There should be more insight in the Bezos, you know, storage units to see, you know, how much stuff is there. We should show it so much that people get sick, actually, just by viewing it.
Do you think if clothing becomes more expensive, fashion becomes only for the elite?
No, because I think you can still, you know, it's the same budget, buy 3 items versus 9 or 12, what they do now in you know, the cheapest change. You can still have 3 very nice items for a decent price. So it's not that you count people off. Then there's, of course, also the allure of the second hand, which is very important and can be had at cheaper prices. Then there is the raiding of the cupboards of grandmothers and mothers and friends of mothers and so on, which should not be underestimated. And then there is the making or the remaking yourself. I really think that there is at the horizon the revival of making your own clothes. Knitting your own.
That's super interesting. I was talking to someone else that felt that, yes, craft was coming back rather than receding.
You know, the whole crochet thing, there's a whole new generation of young girls You know, they went to the crochet, I think, during COVID like crazy, because that's an easy way to be busy, you know, and to make something quickly and very pretty and a bit sexy because it's a bit transparent. And now it becomes a major fashion trend, actually, but it comes from the public itself. You know, it's a public infused tendency. And so you can see that as the beginning of, there's also a lot of people who want to do mending. So they mend their clothes to make them not only stitch up, but make them very creative and very crazy. Here
Yeah, there's a Swedish
there
brand.
is a very big trend from mostly African men. They patch up old military clothes with African motifs and so, and indigo, and it looks amazing.
Oh, that sounds
very
fun.
stylish. So yeah, there is, I think in the world, there is many answers to our question and to our prayers.
I'm wondering if you can talk about sort of the role of fiber innovation. I'm not a scientist and I'm not the kind of expert that you are in this matter, but we keep being introduced to new savior fabrics or fibers, you know, and it's sort of, but in my experience, often, not all the time, but often something that seems good very, you know, in a year or so later, the after effects are sort of revealed. And so I'm wondering, you know, are we relying too much on the idea of a savior fiber or savior fibers to sort of make things right? It occurs to me that, you know, there's a circularity in running a business as well, you know, an ethical business. I'd love your thoughts on that.
Well, there's two strains here. We have the sort of innovative fiber and we have the ancient fiber. And one of the great ideas, I think, is to rediscover ancient fiber, because there is properties in these fibers which are so amazingly profitable and much better than what we do now, that would be a very easy way to renew. For instance, nettle is a product which doesn't need water. And it makes a beautiful fiber, somewhere between, it feels a bit between linen and wool. It's fantastic for denim. It dyes very well color. And of course, as you know, nettle is in everybody's garden. It's a horror story, but it's, you know, it's very coriace, and so it will grow very, very quickly. For now, it's just from Nepal where people use it for knitting, but there's a lot of discussion about bringing that back. Then there is linen versus cotton. Linen is definitely the better candidate, and there's a lot of rediscovering of how to make linen in Europe, and I think also a bit in the United States, young people doing sort of workshops, making their own fields, and so sort of rerouting the whole thing. Then there is, of course, hemp, which is more available because of the cannabis question, I guess. It becomes more mainstream. So all the bast fibers from Japan and Korea are very interesting. There's the mulberry paper, there's paper yarns, there's a host of things we don't use. We have forgotten, we should use, because they give also excitement because of their behavior. They really feel new, so you really feel different. And they can be mixed with other fibers. Then there is, Italy is very good in mixing fibers, so they can get the weights they want. So that it's not just wool, it has 5-6 other ingredients. So they make a sort of new soup. So it's really interesting fabrics. And then especially for tailoring. And then there is the new fiber, which was a promise for most of my life, like spider silk, you know, was on the map for, I don't know, 25, 35 years. Now it is there. Now it is made in laboratories. It doesn't need spiders. It's a miracle. I've seen it, I've had it in my hand, but it is not there. So the amount of investment we need to make those things really become revolutionary that's a lot of money. But it could completely wipe out polyester and lycra and all these things, because there's at least 6 different spider possibilities, and there's a lot of stretch because they need stretch to have their victims, you know. And so there is profiles to be made which are amazing. So please give us this spider silk, you know, more quick. Because in the meantime, we are making all these synthetic things. Then there is, of course, the promise of the cellulose, which is very well managed by the Finnish, especially Aalto University. They are very advanced, and people like McCarthy, Stella McCarthy, she is working with the forest there. And so she's planning 4 years ahead the amount of trees she can have for her cellulose. So it's completely controlled management of the forest.
Wow.
Same happens with farms. For instance, a company like Eileen Fisher, they are involved with their farmers to do regenerative farming. And that will all become requirements later, is that there is for me, a big step in the future will be the fiber step. And we don't think about it. People don't even know, you know, from one fiber to another. They maybe know that this is a plant and this is an animal, but that's where it stops. And it's such a fascinating world. And then we haven't even started to discover new stuff, you know. Algae we're working on now, you know, many students do. It's not yet an industry. Mushrooms, we're all interested in. It's not yet an industry, not for building or for bags. You know, it's all sporadic still. But there's a lot of, in the end, there will be a lot of possibilities, but it's a bit slow, I feel.
What do you think, ideally the textile industry could look like in 10 or 20 years?
Completely integrated, I think, from farm, forest, maybe even sea, to consumer. Much more connected, much more cooperation, much less waste, creating the amount of things we need, creating together, not sampling and then choosing and then throwing away and then sampling again. You know, there's so much waste in the process. Whether if we would do things together, you know, we could combine and compact things. And even, for instance, for the companies who create overseas in Asia and so on, it would be very interesting to have creative satellites there, which are working maybe for a group of brands or for, you know, for a family of brands, so that it doesn't have to be each person for each brand for each t-shirt, which ends up to be the same anyhow. So I think we could streamline very much organization, which would streamline the process, which would streamline the waste. It would take away also the waste.
And it seemed during the pandemic and even before that fashion and home are moving closer and closer together. And I'd love your thoughts on that. And also, when I work with students, there are so many students graduating from the fashion programs, in my experience, that some of them I kind of see having more of a career in textile design than fashion. What are your thoughts on the subject?
This is a problem. Everybody wants to be a catwalk designer, and there's actually only maybe 0.0000001% who will make it. And so a lot of people are frustrated for life. And because they're not educated in industrial design, they're not educated, you know, in this streamlining or in this more the farming side of things, so, or the fiber side, or the color side even. You know, people don't even know all the jobs you can get around it, right?
Mm.
And what was your question again?
I was thinking about how home and fashion were moving, seemingly moving closer together. And of course, textile is the connector there.
Completely. And the interior is receiving much more textile than before. You know, people are crazy about textiles everywhere. And often these textiles are almost similar to clothing. And with the huge influence of bedding and lounging, you know, and lounge-worthy clothes, the connection became even more important. So if you're bedding, you're doing homeware, and if you're doing homeware, you're doing bedding, and so, you know, so it's all starting to blur. And it's nice. It gives new product categories, which are a bit fresh because they're made with a new eye. And they're also presented in a new way. So it has a context, gives context to clothes, which is nice.
Yes, a context for me as an archivist is so important. And I think this disassociation of image with history or context sometimes is troublesome. And I don't know if that's my age, but I think that, but I think context is very important. And I think if we're to learn from history, we must have context, you know, because the hope is that we don't repeat the same mistakes and we can move, you know, forward. And one last question. I was reading a book on sustainability, and one of the ideas that came through that was quite interesting is the way that, and this is something that 3S4 always talks to me about, manus et machina. So how hand and technology can work together. And I think I hadn't really thought about it, you know, but they can be complementary is, I guess, the idea, and create better sort of working environments all around. And yeah, can you talk to me a little bit about how you see technology and handwork or artisanal knowledge working hand in hand for a better world?
I'm convinced about this. When I was working at Parsons, I was the Dean of Hybrid Design discipline. So that was all based on how you could actually put slow craft into high tech, you know, and it would become one. And then we made a book with Philip Fumano called Labor of Love, which is about a generation of designers, young designers, which started to work by hand. You know, after 9/11, beginning of the century, the hand became super important because we could not really discuss design. You know, it was such a weird period. And so gradually then people did want some mechanic or some computer aided things. And so I compare them to Edward Scissorhand, you know, who needed suddenly to enlarge the hands to be able to do more things. This is exactly what we showed in this beautiful book and exhibition, which was not well visited because it was COVID, but still 10,000 people. And it shows crystal clear how this togetherness is perfect. And I'm reading a lot right now about how there could be the ecology of technology, which could become an issue, and where technology is actually employed to help the system, to regulate the system, to prevent mistakes, to preview possibilities, and so on a much more softer, approach. And this would be because you take the idea of gain and growth out of the equation. I think if we can manage to create a society which wants to continue to create, which is what we want to do, and who wants to enjoy beauty, which is very good for our neurons and which we actually need. So we never want to say no to everything, you know, it's all about embracing the beautiful in a new way. And so this is where I think the challenge is, you know, how can we use all these skills, ours and also robots and computers, to create a better world, basically. And so it's all about cooperation. It needs to be connected much more. It all needs to be, very intimately connected, actually.
And very last question, are you optimistic for the future?
It's getting hard. It's certainly at this point, it's getting very hard. You know, the war doesn't help. But there are signs that finally, you know, the day that ecology equals economy, which is a bit happening right now because gas is so expensive and so on, that would be maybe the only motivation for the world to change. Quite radically, but I'm not sure if we're not a bit too late. And I think that we are completely underestimating nature and the power of forces in nature, and that we should cooperate with them also much more and learn from them. And that we are thinking this to be this Uber people, and we are not, you know. We are not really doing the right thing. So there's a lot to learn, I would say, before we could be optimistic again. But I try to sample what is good. That's what we do with education. That's what we do with the World Hope Forum. That's what we do with New York Textile Month, with Talking Textiles. We are collecting, which is good, connecting it together, broadcasting it, so it's inspiring more people to also, you know, be part of this movement, because it's a movement. And to say one day, okay, I'm also going to change my position, I'm going to change my job, I'm going to do things very differently and be more happy also. And that is happening, you know, many people are changing quite radically their lives. So we don't have the figures, but I have the feeling that it's no longer just fragments. I think it's more. So that makes me mildly optimistic.
Well, that's good. Yes, and I always find, for my part, I think what's excited me most in the past few years are the knitwear students. I think knitwear is extremely exciting area of fashion, and in part because, I mean, you kind of have to go to school to have access to the machines, and they couldn't have access to the machines, but they still needed to knit, and the innovations and the solution, the problem solving I have seen, which was often very green and very sustainable and very homey, you know, was super exciting to me. And also technology in knitwear, the ability to do no waste production, I think is also super exciting.
Yeah. Well, the pandemic, in a way, was amazing for creative students. You know, they learned to improvise. They did improvise, many of them. And therefore, I think their generation will completely outdo all others, because they went through this hardship, but now they're armed with what is make-do design, you know, and make-do philosophy. You know, what's here, what type of fabric is there, you know, what's here for my family, how can I dye from the garden, you know. And so we saw the loom come back, we saw the knitwear come back, we saw the natural colors come back. We saw whole collections based on amazing, finding solutions. And so it became so much more creative than the years before. It was quite sensational. So that's, maybe the pandemic was a bit short for some people, because it's horrible, they say, for schools, and it was very difficult to teach on distance, as you know, as I know. But there is a very interesting result.
Mm. Yes, I think there's when you have to figure out something, you really own it, it's exciting to find a solution to struggle and solve, at least in my opinion. I think that is something that really stays with you.
It is.
Yeah.
And they all tell us, it's because of the shortage, because I couldn't find it. I started to work with paper, or I recycled plastic, or whatever they did. It's remarkable, I think.
Yes, and I think this reconnection with everyday things, like I believe in the life of objects. Do you know what I mean? Like a vase has a certain presence, or, instead of looking out, looking, around you, I think is also an interesting change of perspective.
Yeah, this is what we worked on a lot, on the idea of animism, that actually all matter and all also inert matter has a spirit. And so that each object also has a spirit. And so that you can connect with these spirits, and that they can talk to you, and that you can talk to them like you talk to your pet or your plant. And that is actually, it's coming back very, very strongly in many writings and many circles. And I think it's another way to create another way of producing. Because once you produce with love, a real deep felt love and interest, and give time to the design, then you can make it industrial and it still will have a soul,
Interesting.
So it's a possibility to blow life into into industry.
That's beautiful.